What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the first person shooter tutorial series, we're going to be going over sprint shake. So when we are to sprint, we want to have a screen effect that shows that the character is running. My sprint effect looks like this. So there's a little bit of bobbing up and down with the head. Basically the character is running and we're just trying to show that there is some fast motion going on. There's a lot of mobility going on. Now, the animation itself, the running animation, does have a little bit of movement with the character's head, but almost all of this is being done with our camera shake effect, and we can loop it indefinitely. And then as soon as we stop sprinting, of course, it stops and everything goes back to normal. So in the previous episode, we had covered a little bit of shake when firing, as well as shake when taking damage. And those were one-offs, so we would play them, and they would just play until their duration was done, but the sprint will continue to go until we stop sprinting. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Before we hop into this episode, if you'd like to check out anything else that we've done in this series and get caught up, you can click this icon in the top right corner right here. You'll check out the entire playlist. You can go over interactions, enemies, particle effects, all that good stuff. Alternatively, if you just care about the sprinting and the screen shake effect, then I'll link you to this episode right here, which is the previous episode where we did the other camera shake effects. That will make your life a little bit easier if you follow that one, because you will know the basic setup that we're going to use to create the camera shake effects. But don't worry, I'm going to cover it all today, so they're not required to watch to implement this episode. With all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series, and we're going to start in the code. In fact, pretty much everything is going to be done in the code today. So let's go to the code. If we're in Unreal Engine 5, we go to our C++ classes and hit add to add a new C++ class. But if you're in Unreal Engine 4, you can just hit add, and up at the top it'll say new C++ class. Either way, go ahead and press this and go to all classes. We want to make a code class for our sprint shake, just like we did with our base damage shake in the previous episode. And the class that we want to use is the Matinee Camera Shake. So Matinee Camera Shake right here, we're going to hit next, and we're going to name it. I called mine base sprint shake. Right here, base sprint shake. But again, call it whatever you want. Once you have your name in here, I leave the other things default typically, but feel free to change them if you want. And then go ahead and press create class. Now, I've already done this, but once you do this, it should open up your Visual Studio. If you already had Visual Studio open, then it will most likely add these files on here for you and make you stop running the program. However, if you didn't have Visual Studio open, then most likely you'll just see these files get added to your source folder in your code. And I have my new files, basesprintshake.cpp and basesprintshake.h. Let's open both of those up, and we'll start in the basesprintshake.h file. It should look almost identical to this when you open it up for the first time. The only things that I've added are these two lines right here. And essentially what we want to do is create a constructor so that we can fill out all the default data for our shake. When we fill out our default data, that's how we are actually going to create the shake effect, because we can change all the parameters about it to get the desired result. So all I've done in the .h file is add the constructor, and I did add a public keyword here as well. This just means that it can be seen by other classes. It's not required that it's public, but my other constructors were public, and I decided to stay with that same method and keep everything consistent. So public colon, and then we write the name of the class. So I have uBaseSprintShake. So my constructor should be called uBaseSprintShake. Once you've created your constructor in your .h file, you can go ahead and open up your .cpp file. Now in here, when you start out, you should only have these two highlighted lines. We are going to add the constructor today, so everything you see highlighted now is what we've added to this file. So go ahead and create your constructor, uBaseSprintShake : uBaseSprintShake. And then inside the brackets in here, we are going to set all the default values for all the variables that we want to change. Now, in my previous episode with my base damage shake, I had gone over a lot of these. So I actually went ahead and copied these and used the same variables, but I did change the values. There are some really important changes that we have to make. They're simple, but they are really important to get our sprint shake working correctly. You can do that if you watched the previous episode, but if not, I'm going to cover it all right now, so don't worry about that. And so starting off, we have our oscillation duration, blend in time, and blend out time. Now, oscillation you can really think of as the actual camera shake effect. And so the duration is quite literally how long it lasts. In my other examples, again, like the base damage shake, it was 0.5 for half a second. But in the sprint shake, I've set it to be negative 1.0. And the reason for this is because negative 1 means infinite until we stop it. So it will continuously loop and play that shake effect until we stop it. And you can see the comment here is the length of the sprint camera shake effect in seconds. A value of negative 1.0 F is an infinite duration. So that's what we want for our camera shake. The oscillation blend in time and oscillation blend out time are similar to animation blending. So it will take 0.1 seconds to go from no shake to the shake, and it will take 0.2 seconds to go from the shake to no shake. Basically entering the shake and exiting the shake. The higher you make this value, the more time it will take to blend into the camera shake, and the higher you make this value, the more time it will take to blend out of the camera shake. So I've just used 0.1F and 0.2F here, but that is entirely up to you. Those don't have any special things like the duration did, so that is just your preference on what it looks like when entering and exiting the shake. Now, I've added rotation oscillation and location oscillation for the sprint shake as well. So rotation and location oscillation are pretty much what you'd expect. So rotation refers to rotating the camera and creating that shake effect due to rotating it. The location oscillation actually moves the position of the camera, so you're giving it that shake effect from the location change. Again, another thing I mentioned in the previous episode with the shake is that you have your pitch, your roll, and your yaw on your rotation oscillation. I just happen to use the pitch. I like the bobbing effect that we had, and so I was going for that method. But you can also play around with your rot oscillation dot and see what you have. Again, you'll have your pitch, roll, and yaw, so you could add in some different values here. And then you have amplitude, which is the intensity of the rotation oscillation. So if you set it to a higher value, you're going to get more rotation. A lower value, you will get less rotation. The frequency is the rate at which this rotation oscillation will finish. So the higher you put this value, the more times it'll finish or complete the entire rotation in the same amount of time that has passed. Then we have rotation oscillation.pitch initial offset, and this is where we want to start the rotation oscillation. So you basically have two values here. So we have offset random and offset 0. The EOO underscore max, you can ignore that. That is just a way to know how many values are in that enum. So it's not really one you're intended to choose, but offset random will start rotation of the camera at a random spot. So it won't be the same every time you run it. For the sprint, I wanted it to be the same every time. So I went ahead and used offset 0. But again, you'll notice in the base damage shake, I did use offset random for all my values. So offset random is good if you want it to be a randomized effect. If you want a specific effect, then use offset 0. And the way you grab this is by grabbing an enum value that Unreal has, and that is the E initial oscillator offset colon colon and then your type. So for me, it's EOO offset 0. And by the way, this EOO just stands for enum oscillator offset. Alright, and then lastly we have the waveform of the rotation oscillation. So rot oscillation.pitch.waveform equals, and then we have another enum value here, and we have our E oscillator waveform enum that Unreal has, colon colon, and we can pick two things here. We can pick Perlin noise or sine wave. Now, I had gone ahead and picked Perlin noise on this one for all of my options. And that is because Perlin noise is used for more organic. It should be really smooth. That is what you want to use Perlin noise for. Something like a sine wave doesn't always look very natural. So you remember, if you watched the last episode, I said it adds a more circular effect when you're using the Perlin noise with the damage. And that's because it wasn't just jutting out to the side. So as soon as I would take damage, it would just automatically go to this portion of the screen and apply this shake. It would give it a little bit more feeling to it. It would be like, oh, I actually took damage, so I jerked a certain way. That's really what we're going for here. So I'm going to use the Perlin noise here for all of these. Now, after explaining all those, these other two are really simple. We have our location oscillation instead of the rotation oscillation, and we get that by using lock oscillation. And then we can use X, Y, and Z. The X is the depth, and we don't need that. I just want to go up and down and horizontal as well. So we're going to just set the same variables, the amplitude, frequency, initial offset, and waveform on the Y and Z of the location oscillation. So you can see what I have here. I have 5.0, frequency of 1.0, which, by the way, should make these frequencies 1.0 F. My mistake there. Speaking of, we should add that to our damage shake. These are all floats, so want to make sure that we mimic that type. Then we have our initial offset, which again 0, so it's not randomized. The waveform of Perlin noise, so it looks more natural. And then the same values for Z. The Y and the Z I actually have the same values for, and I think it came out pretty nicely. But play around with it until you get the effect you want. Now once you've created your sprint shake effect, we are going to want to go into our FPS tutorial character.h, because the FPS tutorial character is my base character, and that's where we're going to be applying the sprint and stopping the sprint as well. And so, of course, when we begin the sprint, we are going to want to apply the sprint camera shake, and then when we stop the sprint, we're going to stop the sprint camera shake. The first thing we want to do when we come into our FPS tutorial character.h is include the sprint shake class. So make sure when you include this that you put it above your .generated.h file that you have. That should always be your bottom include in your header files. So I put it the line directly above it, and we include our base sprint shake class. When we do this, we can actually access the base sprint shake that we created. So this is the file, this is the actual class right here. We need to access it so we can grab all those variables and values that we set in the .cpp file. And so we're going to scroll down to our variables. And here is my sprint shake variable. We need to make one of this type because we need to know when to start it and when to stop it. Since it is infinite and it does not run off of a given duration, we need to stop it, otherwise the sprint effect will always play. So it's very important that we keep track of the effect that we start. And to do this, we can use a U-based sprint shake pointer, that's what the asterisk is for, and give it a name. We're going to call it the sprint shake ref for sprint shake reference. This does not need to be U property, but you could add it if you want to edit anything about it in the blueprint. Additionally, while we're here, I'd like to just move these F timer handles. And I would just move them up. Quite frankly, it was just annoying me that the T arrays were separated from each other. Since these are the only T arrays I have in here, I wanted to put them next to each other. Just an organizational thing for me. But I figured I would show it instead of just moving it and making it more confusing later. Alright, with this sprint shake variable created, we can go into the FPS tutorial character.cpp. And we're going to want to scroll down to our constructor, just right here, and scroll down to where we set all of our variables. And we're going to want to set this variable to null pointer by default. So if it's not valid, then we'll know that it's null pointer, in which case we don't have a current sprint shake reference. Or essentially, we just aren't playing a camera shake effect right now for sprinting. So set it to null pointer by default. Then we want to go to where we want to activate this camera shake effect, which is going to be in our sprint function. So scrolling down, we have a sprint function that triggers when we press a button. We do a few things in here, like make sure the player or the character is not dead before being able to sprint. And in this case, I also have some abilities, and we can only sprint if we're not using our second ability. That's not super important. Essentially, what you need to do is just go to where you set is sprinting to true and update the character's walk speed. In here is where we want to play our camera shake effect because that's when we've actually started sprinting. It looks a little complicated because it's pretty long, but I promise it's not so bad. What we really need to do here is call a function in uGameplayStatics. And to do that, we need to include a file. Now, if you watched the previous episode on camera shakes, you will already have this file. But there is a file that we need called kismet/gameplaystatics.h. And if you don't have this, you're going to need to include it right now. This will allow us to get access to our player camera manager, which will also allow us to trigger a camera shake effect on that camera. So once we have that file included, go back down to the sprint function, and we are going to use uGameplayStatics : get player camera manager. Now this function, the get player camera manager, takes in the world and the index of the camera that we want to grab. So we can get the world by simply typing get world parentheses, and the index we want is for player 1 right now. So we're just going to pass in index 0, kind of hard code that. If you have player indices set up, or you're working in a multiplayer game, that can still work fine. Just make sure you pass in the proper player index that you want to grab the camera from. Then we can call a function off of the returned player camera manager called start camera shake right here. Now start camera shake is going to begin playing that camera shake effect. And all we have to do to make that work is actually pass in a static class. So it expects the static class of the sprint shake, or essentially the static class of the shake that we want to play. So we're going to use uBaseSprintShake : static class parentheses. This logic that I've shown will make it so you actually start the camera shake effect, but we need to keep track of the camera shake effect so we can also stop it. So you can see all of that logic I showed you was in parentheses related to a cast. So we went cast, uBaseSprintShake, and then everything else was in parentheses. So this entire result gives back a default Matinee Camera Shake. We cast it to the uBaseSprintShake. That way we can set it equal to our sprint shake reference variable. And at this point, we have started the sprint shake effect, and the sprint shake reference also knows about that camera shake effect. We can actually just use this now to stop our camera shake effect. So we're going to scroll down to our stop sprinting function. And again, there are a few parameters here. I check to make sure we're not dead before stopping sprinting. And then make sure we're not crouching or using our second ability. Again, the important part is that you go to where is sprinting is being set to false and the max walk speed is being set back to the default move speed. At this point, we can use our uGameplayStatics again, : We're going to get the player camera manager again with the same parameters as last time, get world and index 0, and we're going to call a new function called stop camera shake. When you call stop camera shake, it requires a Matinee Camera Shake reference, and we have one, and that is our sprint shake reference. It is a child class of Matinee Camera Shake because the base sprint shake is a child of Matinee Camera Shake, but of course that is allowed, that will work. So we pass it in here. It will stop the camera shake, but it will also clear and invalidate the variable. So then it goes back to its default value, and you can set it again the next time you sprint. There you go, guys. That is literally all you have to do to create a sprint camera shake effect. You can play around with it and change those values in the .cpp file as much as you want to get a different effect. But you have all the ability in the world to create your own custom camera shake effect for sprinting. Now, if this video helped you and you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel, and it's completely free, so I'd really appreciate it. I also want to give another thank you and shout out to my Patreon and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys. You are awesome. You keep these series alive, and you always give me great ideas to work on, so I'm so excited to get these to you each month. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to help you out, and it's completely free. Anyway, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.